All right, on the last video that we did on this topic, we're talking about family business and succession to start off with. And the last topic was basically how do you know when the second generation is ready to step into leadership. And one of the things that we obviously advocate for is making that transition part of the strategic plan. And we talked about how the strategic planning process itself is very helpful in understanding and discerning when somebody has the leadership capacity to step in and take over the reins of the company. Now, even if that's happened, even if we're in a situation where, without question, the second generation, competency-wise and leadership-wise, is ready to step in, the topic this week is really about letting go. And the issue that comes up is getting mom and dad, or that first generation, to let go of the reins of leadership and let the next generation take over. And when we see that happen, there's three kind of broad, overly stereotyped buckets you can put this stuff into. But one of them that we see, and it's fairly common, is kind of the from my cold dead hands Charlton Heston approach to you'll get this company when I'm gone and not until then. And mom and dad hang on to it and try to control it. And part of that may be because they can't picture themselves doing anything else. Part of it could be because they just don't trust, despite all of the evidence to the contrary, that the second generation is ready and capable, and they're just not ready to let go. The second option that we often see when that first generation is burned out is just take it. I don't want it anymore. And that's a very tough transition for that second generation to manage, because a lot of stuff typically hasn't been done properly before that. They've been burned out for a reason, because the problems have continued to pile up, and they probably took too much of the operational responsibility on their shoulders. And so when they say take it and they just walk away, there's a lot of plates that we're spinning that now hit the ground, and it's up to that second generation to put the pieces back together and try to move on. That's obviously very difficult. And then the last one is that there's no decision whatsoever. And mom and dad, and sometimes that comes out of the from my cold dead hands mentality, and they just hold on to it until they're not here anymore. And this is most problematic, causes the most issues, where they don't make any decision about who the business is going to be passed on to, and it goes to their heirs, which could be three siblings, only one of whom actually works in the business. And now that person who's put their blood, sweat, and tears into this for the last 20 or 30 years now is a co-equal partner with a brother and a sister who don't have anything to do with the business, but expect to start getting paid a salary out of the business, expect their dividend payments to pay off all their college debt and set them up for retirement and all that stuff. And it's just unrealistic. And those situations where no decision is made is really unfortunate. You can see the demise of a business very quickly in a second or third generation, where mom and dad just gave the business equally to everybody regardless of their involvement in this. So we don't advocate for that, but that's not necessarily a subject to go into. There's easy ways to remedy that. But in this video, what we want to talk about is choosing an option other than these three, a deliberate handoff of the business to that next generation. If not in ownership, at least in operational control and setting the tone for everything that comes after. So, not surprisingly, you hear us talk about vision a lot. It's incredibly important. It's incredibly practical. We weave it into almost everything we do as a result. And vision has a huge a huge part to play in this transition, this handoff, because there's roughly four things that can be happening with the vision. There can be no vision whatsoever. And if there's no vision, there's just kind of this sense of, well, we're trying to keep our head above water. We don't really know where things are supposed to go next. That's where you're making decisions on the competency of that next generation to take over, kind of based very subjectively, because there typically isn't a strategic plan if there's no vision. And that's an almost impossible situation to make a handoff in. What you'll see is an operator handing the business off to another operator, somebody who's just trying to keep things going, but the business isn't really going to make any big leaps forward. It's not going to do anything different. It's not going to grow and advance. It's probably actually going to contract and decline once mom and dad step away. The second thing is that there once was a vision, but mom and dad have kind of checked that off. They've kind of ticked the box and they've arrived. They've accomplished everything they wanted to accomplish. And that's often what you see in this take it phase of, I did everything I thought I'd ever do. For the last kind of 4 or 5 years, we've just been in limbo, don't really have anything that's waking us up and firing us up to, get out of bed in the morning and get here. And I guess you can just take it and have it. I don't want it anymore. And that has all kinds of problems. Vision conflict is when mom and dad are wanting to do something, one thing, and the next generation says we should go over here. And this is the one that kills businesses in the second generation, because that second or third generation is trying to do something. Mom and dad are holding them back. They've given over some control, but not all. And the business just chews through resources with no end in sight, and pretty soon there's nothing left. Where you have to get to, where ideally you'd want to get to, you don't have to, you can do it wrong all day if you want to, but if you want to do it right, getting to a shared vision is really what you have to resolve out of these three, get to a shared vision to really make that transition happen. And the question of shared vision it's not an easy one to get to, because sometimes that second generation does want to go in a new direction. Requires mom and dad to be a little bit humble, requires them to realize maybe they don't know it all. It also requires the second generation to spend enough time understanding the business and the market to have a realistic sense of where the business should go. Right? But if you go back to the previous video where we talked about the advantages of making that determination about the second generation stepping into leadership on the basis of their place in a strategic plan and how well they've helped the business execute on previous strategic planning type stuff, then they probably do have that understanding. They probably are realistic. Mom and dad do have a great sense of appreciation for their capacity to lead and what they can do in the future. And so getting to a shared vision may not be as difficult, but let's say that mom and dad and that next generation do share the vision. They're 100% on the right page. It still may be difficult for mom and dad to let go, because the question is, well, who should lead the organization? Like, I think they're ready, but and they've done well in the strategic plan, and I want to hand that over, but how do I do it? And what does that transition look like? And the question of who leads, the answer to that should always be whoever is the source or the driver of the vision. And I say source or driver because it's possible that this second generation could be signing up for the vision that mom and dad articulated and have been working toward for the last 20 or 30 or 40 years. Maybe it's some grand strategy or vision to conquer the world, and that second generation is all in, right? They're not the source, but now they're becoming the driver of that vision. They're becoming the voice. They're becoming the one who's talking about it to new recruits. They're becoming the one who's bringing it up at all hands meetings. They're becoming the one that's using it to make decisions about opportunities in the market and what the business should be doing and what it should be focusing on and what it shouldn't be focusing on. And if they're the driver, then they should lead, right? And it's pretty simple to understand that if that second generation is the source of the new vision, meaning mom and dad were kind of going in one direction, or maybe they ticked the box and they'd accomplished, and there's a very clear difference between what the next generation wants to do and what mom and dad had done, and mom and dad are okay with it and they recognize that this is kind of the new path, and that second generation is the source of that vision, then absolutely they should be the one who leads. So when we get into a situation where mom and dad are struggling to hand off, and you go, well, it seems like you guys share the same vision, who's the source or the driver of that vision? They say, well, right now it's us. We say, okay, it's great that you recognize that. For that next generation to become, for you to feel comfortable letting go, they need to become the driver of that vision. And how does that happen? So an analogy that's kind of helpful for that is, this is supposed to be my limited artistic ability. This is like a running track, high school track meet kind of thing, right? It's got all these lanes. When you think about a relay race, where there's usually 4 people running the relay race, always 4 people running the relay race, and they have a baton. And for you to not get disqualified, you have to complete the race with the baton going from one person to the next person to the next person to the next person, right? But you don't get to pick where you hand that baton off, right? There's a designated area. So in part of that track, there's a line in the track in the lane, and you can't hand the baton off before that line, and you can't hand the baton off after a line that's a little bit further down the track. So as that first generation is coming in to the lane where they're going to be able to hand off the baton, they're picking up as much speed as possible. It's the end of their race, right? And the thing that I'm trying to get to is there's a lot of momentum, a lot of good things are happening in the business. And that second generation, far from going at a standstill, they're matching the pace of mom and dad. They are looking behind them and they're running for all they're worth, and they're trying to pick up the speed so they can match the pace. And then once they get the baton, they're unencumbered by having to look back, and they can just look forward and they can take off and they can run for all they're worth. In a practical way, that only happens if it's very intentional that second generation becomes the source and the driver of the vision that's happening in the business. So that means that they have to take a more upfront role. It means that they have to be perceived as the one who's driving the vision. It means that they have to be the one who's responsible for refining and more fully articulating that vision and painting the picture of what the organization aspires to in the future. And if mom and dad always want to hold the baton, and if they always want to be seen as the ones who are the drivers and the source of the vision of the company, it'd be very, very hard for them to let go of it. And that's part, you got to let go of the baton. That's the whole point of it. And the baton, in this analogy, is the vision you have for the company, which is paint me the picture of where you want this business to go. What's it going to accomplish in the world? What kind of place is it going to occupy? And that should get you out of bed in the morning. And if it gets the second generation out of bed in the morning too, then all the better, and the transition will work.